Hey, what's going on, everyone? Nick Yuskevich here once again with Daily Fantasy Winners, and we've got a strategy video for this episode of Tee to Green. And for this episode, it will be specifically on par scoring, meaning like par 3 scoring, par 4 scoring, par 5 scoring, the scoring average statistics that are kept PGA Tour wise, and why I don't think you should be using them when making your DFS lineups, whether you're plugging it into an algorithm or whether you're just looking for some statistics to look at to see which golfers show up highly in those categories when you're trying to make your DFS lineups. So there are a lot of people out there, I think public players and some people who consider themselves sharps as well. And just, you hear it on different platforms as well, whether it be podcasts, other YouTube videos, articles, things of that nature. There are a lot of people who like using the par scoring averages, and you'll mainly hear it with par 4 scoring, and you'll hear it a little bit also with par 5 scoring, not so much par 3 scoring, but probably the most common example you'll hear people talk about is, oh, we get 2 extra par 4s this week because it's a par 70, so we should be putting more emphasis on par 4 scoring, and maybe it's the Sony Open this week, and they'll say, plus, if you look at previous Sony Opens in the past, the people who always do well on par 4s are usually the people that end up winning the tournament or finish at the top of the leaderboard. And that is true, but that is also very misleading, and that's very misleading. And there's reasoning behind it, and which I will get into. But there are going to be 2 main points I will get into with this video. From a research standpoint, it just doesn't really make much sense to use any of the par scorings, in my opinion, just because there are better statistics out there that are more clear and just more predictive of what will end up happening. I ran some different stats to find correlations to see if my theories were correct, and they pretty much are. And so anyways, there will be 2 main points I make here. Number one, which will be the first one, which will be very quick, and it'll be the logic behind it. And the second point I will make is the statistical and more practical way to approach it. So first of all, and that'll be much more in depth, the second point there. But so the first one is the logic behind this. This will be very simple. From a golfer's mindset standpoint, there really just isn't a difference in how you play a golf hole because of what par is. Par is just a number they put on a hole to use for scoring purposes, as opposed to how a golfer plays a hole. The goal is always to get the ball in the hole in the fewest number of shots possible. Like, that's very straightforward and it's very obvious. But it's still important to note that it's obviously like you're not playing some type of a different game, or you're not even hitting that many different types of shots on a par 4 versus a par 5 or a par 3 versus a par 4. Yeah, you're not hitting a driver on par 3s, obviously, unless it's like a 260-yard par 3 at the U.S. Open. But generally speaking, you're hitting the same kinds of shots. It's just certain holes are a little bit longer than others. Now, that's just the general logical, obvious way of from a starting point. But now we'll get it obviously into the practical and all the statistical angles of it. And this will be a little bit more in depth, like I said. Okay, for the more practical way to approach this, we have to look at par scoring for each par 3, par 4, and par 5 to see what it correlates to. Par 3 scoring usually are players that are good in greens and regulation, proximity to the hole, and approaches from like 150 to like 225 yards, and also strokes gained approaching the green. Those are things that are definitely decently correlate to par 3 scoring. And we'll get now for par 4 scoring. For par 4 scoring, these are players who are just good. Like, they're the best players in the game. And this is the most important note when people talk about par 4 scoring. The majority of golf holes, no matter where the tournament is at, the majority of all golf holes on the course are going to be par 4s. They're going to be between 10 and 12 par 4s at every tournament, maybe 13 on an occasional exception. But 10 to 12 basically is how many they're going to be per round. Now, if you do look at par 4 scoring, you're going to see a lot of the names up there at the top. You'll see Jason Day, you'll see Jordan Spieth, Dustin Johnson, those guys. They'll be near the top every time. But there will be a small group of guys that are near the top that aren't quite guys you would certainly consider the best players in the world. So they usually fall into 3 different categories. A, this person either played a really easy schedule and just took advantage of really easy competition, really easy golf courses. So it's probably somebody that does not qualify, that's been playing well, maybe early, middle of the year, who is somebody that was coming off the web.com tour, for example. and then finally started qualifying for some better events later in the year. And so, but they ended up playing like some of the easiest tournaments, maybe in the fall season or something like that, and they took advantage of that. Another the category B that they might fall into is they happen to just have one season where it was really weird, where they were just really bad on par threes and pretty bad on par fives, but they were just really good on par fours. But it's like it only happened for one season. Like that definitely happens. You can just get a kind of an anomaly there, and just have it be a rare occurrence, and then they go back to kind of what they're historically used to be able to be doing more consistently as opposed to the one season. And then category C, I would say, is if you look at par four scoring too early in a season, like if you look at 2017 par four scoring right now, you're going to see some odd names there near the top. It's not a big enough sample size because players have played significantly different amounts of the number of tournaments, because a lot of people play in the fall season. Some people are playing more on the European tour right now, obviously. A lot of the European players, no kidding. And they haven't played very many, if any at all, tournaments on the PGA Tour yet. And so it's just inconclusive data, essentially. And so essentially by looking at par 4 scoring, all you're doing basically when you look at par 4 scoring is you're putting extra value in the odds of a player playing well or winning the tournament, or you're using insufficient or misleading data when you're using par 4 scoring. If you use par 5 scoring, the par 5 scoring, what that correlates to, and this is pretty obvious, it's usually the bombers, the long driving distance hitters, who are the best players on tour, among the best players on tour, right at the top of the list. Dustin Johnson, Jason Day, Rory McIlroy, guys like that. Then you'll see a kind of a category of players that are more the best players that are not necessarily the bombers, like middle of the road, or some of the bombers who are just more inconsistent. So you'll get maybe some more guys like let's see, Jordan Spieth or Brandt Snedeker. I'm just trying to think of the middle range length hitters. Patrick Reed, these kind of guys. They'll be kind of the next guys in line, but they'll be mixed in with like Tony Finau, Luke List. Those kind of bombers, the longer hitters that are kind of maybe are guys that are not on like the Ryder Cup or President's Cup teams, and they get into play 1 or 2 majors a year, something like that. So in any case, that's what you're seeing. And then basically, if you go on farther down the list, then you get to the worst players that are more shorter hitters, anyways, on par 5 scoring. So that's where the statistics kind of correlate to par 3, par 4, and par 5 scoring. So now you're wondering, okay, what's the practical way to approach this then? So for par 3 scoring, which I honestly is the most rare one used, and it probably very rarely comes up, but I will just say this just so it's out there. I would see if you see something with par 3 scoring, I would look to see if all the par 3s are in the range of like 150 to 200 yards, or maybe like 175 to 225, or even 150 to 225 is fine. That's pretty much going to qualify for all of them. But basically, the reason why you want to do this way you can get a bigger sample of golf shots for someone in that range and how good of a mid to long iron player someone is. Because it's important to remember, like, the only real difference between a tee shot on a par 3 from 200 yards out as opposed to a par 4 second shot from 200 yards out is that you're guaranteed a perfect lie and a flat lie on a par 3, and you're obviously not on a par 4, exactly. But a lot of the times it really just makes no difference between the two. I mean, you hit the ball in the green, you hit it as close as you can to the hole, and sometimes you're going to be more aggressive, and sometimes you're not, depending where the pin placement is. I mean, it's really not much difference. And so obviously you want a larger sample size when you are trying to evaluate something like that. So that would be something you could do for par 3 scoring. For par 4 scoring, kind of the same concept here, and this is more important also just because it is par 4 scoring. I would look to see if there are a bunch of really long par 4s at like 500 yards long. You'll find this a lot of times at the US Open venues. I haven't gone into Erin Hills yet. I haven't started researching the US Open, several months away, but that course is rumored to be 8,000 yards long this year and be the longest tournament ever, in golf history, basically. So I'm going to guess there's going to be a lot of 500-yard par 4s there. And and you'll find this at the Farmers Insurance Open too. There were a lot of longer par 4s there. That course is really low to sea level, so the ball doesn't fly as much there. So that's a situation where, longer hitters are usually good as well. And so this way, so if you find a golf course like that that's coming up where you know you're going to have a lot of longer approach shots, then they'll be knowing you know that a lot of players will be hitting mid to long irons into the greens. Then that's something you can focus on as well. The players who are really good, that are maybe long off the tee, but also really good strokes gained approach in the green, or also really good proximity to the hole from like 150 to 225 or 175 to 225, something like that. Or it could be different. It could be a course like Harbour Town, which is, I think, the tournament after the Masters. That is a course that is much shorter and much tighter, and you don't hit driver a lot of the time on that golf course. And so you may want to look at guys that are really good wedge players, from 75 to 150 type of players, for that tournament. So those are times where, instead of just looking at par 4 scoring for a golf course that's like a par 70 or something like that, par 71 even, I would try and see if the golf course sets up to be where there's a lot of the same types of second shots, or at least in the same distance range. That's something you can do. As far as par 5 scoring, this is, driving distance and, just good players is always a good thing for par 5s because it increases your chance for eagles. But I would always do look at this more from an eagles perspective, and if the longer hitters are necessary. This is more of a GPP thing than a cash thing, so bear with me here for a second. But longer hitters are usually higher owned in general as opposed to medium to shorter length hitters. It's not always the case. Obviously, it's not a black and white situation, but generally speaking, that's kind of the way it works out. And if the golf course has par 5s, and it's important to know if the longer hitters are necessary, because if the golf course has par 5s where no one is going to make it an eagle besides holing out, or on the flip side, if all the par 5s are hittable in 2 for everyone, you really don't need to focus on the longer hitters. That's not going to help you that much. And so over the course of a season, you will see the longest best hitters be the best on the par 5s, obviously. But that won't necessarily be that important on certain specific courses when you look at them, just pending how the par 5s lay out and what the weather conditions are and everything like that. So to kind of wrap this up, to make a few points, I just really would not bother with the specifics of par 3, par 4, and par 5 scoring. The strokes gained statistics are the best statistics right now, along with some others that are more useful than par scoring, like some of the proximity to the holes, stuff that I mentioned. You can focus on certain ranges of approach shots. Also, of course, if the course sets up that way. And so I just think that's going to be more useful for you. And then I would also just say, if you're going to focus on golf shots in a specific range, this is a little bit tricky, because you want to focus on a range, if you decide to go this route, between like 50 and 75 yards. You want to have a range, so like 150 to 200, 150 to 225. I really would not do a 25-yard gap, and even a 50-yard range is a little bit debatable, but just because then you're limiting your sample size too much. And in a 25-yard window, that can mean a lot of different things, because a 175-yard shot downhill, downwind, and you need to play and you're trying to control the spin, is much different than going uphill into the wind, play a big draw around a tree. And you're hitting different clubs, sometimes in the same distance. So I always try and say you want to get a little bit of a wider range for a bigger sample size, and it covers more the different kinds of shots and how good somebody is, with their approaches overall. So I just wanted to mention that. And then another thing to note, and this is important also, is about players' schedules that they play on the PGA Tour. You don't see it as much early on in the year in the West Coast and the Florida swing, so it's not that relevant for right now when I'm doing it. But I will note it. You should note that when we get closer to the Masters and we get later into the season, when the schedules become more busy, players often schedule around the courses that fit their games. And now, obviously, not everybody has this kind of flexibility. The better you are on tour, the more flexibility you have with your scheduling. And, sometimes people play in certain events because of sponsorships or hometown ties and, something like that. But a lot of the time, players do not want to go play at golf courses or in tournaments that don't fit their game. So like Harbour Town, like I brought up before, is like a shorter, tighter course. Granted, Jason Day did play there last year, which I found was a little interesting. But you're not going to find Dustin Johnson play there. You're not going to see Rory McIlroy play there. You won't see Bubba Watson will not play there. So they're not going to be longer bomber hitters that usually play on the shorter, tighter courses where you're not going to get to hit driver that much, because that's one of their biggest advantages. So they often don't play there. Now, it is the tournament after the Masters, and a lot of the time, sometimes want to break, and I'm sure there are other reasons that play into it too. But you'll notice as you do daily fantasy golf, and I know I've mentioned this in the past, but if you notice players, certain types of golfers are in specific events later on in the year, there's probably a reason for that. So sometimes when you're doing your research and you see certain statistics pop up, well, take a look at the field and just see if a lot of the guys that are in the field are strong in those categories and not just a really weird wide variety, so to speak. So let's see here. And the last thing, and this is something I know I've said a lot, in previous videos, and I think it's just worth repeating though, because I still see people make this mistake, in my opinion. But use stats at least for the current season and at least the previous season as well. Use it so right now it's February of 2017. You definitely want to use the 2016-17 season and the 2015-2016 season, essentially, when you're looking up the statistics. And sometimes you may even want to go back another year before that, depending what statistics you're looking at. A lot of times with putting statistics, I think it's good to go back several years to get more of a good indicator on how good of a player this putter is. Yes, they can improve and fall back and things like that, and they can work on their games. But putting is such a high variance statistic that it's really good, I think, in my opinion, to use several years of data in putting. But in any case, at least go back for the current year and the previous year. And once we get later into the season, it will not be as big of a deal, just because we'll have more data and more of a sample and everything like that. But even though recent form does matter some in golf, you don't want to roster a player just because someone is really good at a stat in the current year after only playing like 3 tournaments, and then just have that player be horrible when you use them in the following tournament. Because at the end of the day, anybody can be good at any statistic over a month sample. Anybody can do it. Golf's got the variance for that. So, so recent form is great, but for specific stats, you just want the track record of a player being good at something for a golf course that demands it. And that's it. So hopefully this helps. Again, like I said, wouldn't use par 3, par 4, par 5 scoring too much. I just wouldn't use it at all, quite frankly. And if par 4 scoring does show up on a par 70, look for some of the specifics maybe on the approach angle and certain approaches and things of that nature, and par 5 scoring some of the GPP angles with longer hitters and shorter hitters and things like that, and see if the longer hitters are necessary. So in any case, you can follow me at Nick Yuskevich on Twitter. DailyFantasyWinners is on Twitter at DFantasyWinners. And then if you like this video and some of the other stuff we've been doing, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel. We greatly appreciate that. All right. Good luck, everybody.